India operates the largest primary education system in the world. It is tasked with instructing over 200 million children across a sprawling geography, historically hindered by severe infrastructure deficits. Faced with failing educational outcomes, the standard administrative reflex is straightforward capital deployment. The state addresses the problem by buying physical assets. In the early 2000s, this reflex took the form of the Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, a massive government-led initiative launched to overhaul the physical conditions of rural schools. To pay for this, the government instituted a dedicated nationwide special education tax. The mandate was clear: generate the revenue required for an unprecedented capital injection. This chart tracks the success of that spending between 2003 and 2010. In just 7 years, the fraction of rural schools equipped with functioning toilets and electricity more than doubled.
Over that same period, the availability of the midday meal program nearly quadrupled. These billions of dollars successfully materialized in the physical world. Schools were built, power was connected, and children were fed. The Indian state proved it was highly capable of purchasing physical inputs. But constructing a building and serving a meal is entirely distinct from actually delivering an education. Once the infrastructure is built, the success of the system relies exclusively on human capital delivery. The focus shifts from the physical asset to instructional time. In this environment, unauthorized teacher absence becomes the single most critical metric for evaluating the true governance and capacity of the education system. This dual-axis chart plots the massive spike in infrastructure spending against the rate of teacher attendance over the same 7-year period. Despite the capital injection, the national teacher absence rate only dropped a fraction. By 2010, it rested at 23.6%. Economists classify this exact percentage as passive waste. It is a silent, ongoing drain on state resources that occurs not through active embezzlement, but through systemic neglect and lack of professional consequence. On any typical working day in rural India, nearly a quarter of the entire teaching workforce simply does not show up. This missing workforce generates a massive macroeconomic deficit. The exact fiscal cost of paying the salaries of absent teachers totals over $1.5 billion annually. To put that figure in context, this passive waste consumes 60% of the entire special education tax collected by the government. The tax successfully funded the physical illusion of an education system, while the state entirely failed to fund a system of professional accountability. When an education system registers poor student learning outcomes, the standard bureaucratic solution is to hire more personnel to lower class sizes. India attempted exactly this with the Right to Education Act, a $5 billion mandate explicitly designed to push the national student-to-teacher ratio down to 30-1. This diagram shows the baseline metric used by governments, the pupil-teacher ratio, or PTR. According to official payroll data, the massive hiring campaign successfully lowered the national average to 39.8 students per teacher. But relying on payroll data ignores the reality inside the building. To measure actual state capacity, economists use a corrective metric, the effective pupil-teacher ratio. This metric removes absent personnel from the denominator. A teacher who is not physically present cannot instruct a class. Once the 23.6% absence rate is factored in, the national effective pupil-teacher ratio violently jumps back up to over 52 students per active teacher. In the most educationally backward states, places like Bihar and Jharkhand, the actual ratio skyrockets even higher. Often, a single present teacher is left managing 80 to 100 students at a time. Measuring capacity by teachers on a payroll is a bureaucratic delusion. Actual state capacity is determined exclusively by the personnel actively standing in the room. So how do researchers prove what actually fixes provider behavior? A snapshot in time cannot reliably answer this, because it ignores the deep historical and geographic differences between districts.
To find the actual drivers of attendance, researchers utilized a longitudinal panel dataset. They physically tracked the exact same 1,297 villages over a 7-year period. This method eliminates omitted variable bias. By comparing a village only to its past self, researchers isolate exactly which policy changes successfully alter human behavior. This regression visualization from the panel data reveals a highly counterintuitive finding. Reducing the pupil-teacher ratio is significantly correlated with an increase in teacher absenteeism. To understand why hiring teachers increases absenteeism, look at the physical environment. Nearly 80% of rural Indian schools practice multi-grade teaching, where multiple age groups share the same open space. This triggers a psychological substitution effect. When a new marginal teacher is hired, veteran teachers use them as a backstop. They know someone is physically there to mind the room if they skip work. As a result, the absence rate triggered by the new hire vastly outpaces the average system-wide absence rate. Under conditions of weak governance, hiring more personnel is mathematically self-defeating. The new labor simply subsidizes the absenteeism of the existing labor. If the state cannot buy attendance by hiring more teachers, what mechanism actually forces a service provider to show up? Many development organizations assume the solution is bottom-up community monitoring, giving parents oversight of the schools. The panel data proves this assumption false. Increased frequency of parent-teacher association meetings had zero robust correlation with improved teacher attendance. This data isolates the single metric that successfully drove attendance up: top-down administrative inspections. Schools that received an official administrative inspection in the previous 3 months saw a 6.5 percentage point drop in unauthorized absenteeism, a 25% reduction in passive waste. Administrative inspectors succeed where community monitors fail because of their structural leverage. Only an inspector possesses the authority to initiate formal sanctions, write adverse performance records, and suspend pay. Parents have moral authority. Administrative monitors have structural authority. In a low accountability system, structural authority is the only mechanism that alters provider behavior. The $1.5 billion ghost teacher crisis is not caused by a lack of national funds. It is a classic macroeconomic failure of total factor productivity. Fixing productivity in the public sector requires reallocating capital. The state must divert funds away from blindly expanding frontline labor and invest directly in the architecture of governance. The researchers calculate that the state should aggressively hire enough administrative inspectors to increase the probability of a school visit by just 10%. This visual scale weighs the upfront financial cost against the recovered value. Funding the salaries and travel for these new inspectors costs approximately $7.5 million. That 10% increase in inspection probability reduces passive waste by $75 million. Investing in a dedicated monitoring network yields a 10x return on investment. It transforms passive waste directly back into productive instructional capacity. To understand why governments resist this policy, look at the direct unit economics of hiring an inspector versus hiring a teacher. A single inspector is inherently more expensive to employ. Their total operational cost is roughly 2.8 times the salary of a standard rural teacher. True calculation requires econometric math. We must weigh the substitution effect, where new teachers increase absence, against the inspection effect, which decreases it. Ultimately, hiring one expensive inspector is 12.8 times more cost-effective at lowering the effective pupil-teacher ratio. This dynamic applies to state capacity across the entire developing world. The political desire to provide visible, physical assets often blinds governments to the absolute necessity of funding governance. Human development cannot be brute-forced with capital injections alone. Without funding the unglamorous architecture of accountability, billions of dollars will merely